everyone. Thank you, everyone, for coming. And today we're going to talk about Web3. And we invited 3 founders from 3 very successful projects in the decentralized world. We have Steve from Orchid Lab, and we have Matt from Origin Protocol, and we have Brandon from Brave. And myself, I'm TF from Taxa. So to begin with, we would like to let every founder to introduce themselves. And to introduce your background, and also the project and company you are working on. And also, you can talk about what attracts you into the decentralized world. Yeah.
Okay, I'm Brendan Eich. I'm the perpetrator of JavaScript, also co-founder of Mozilla, Firefox, and all that. Founder of Brave, and also the basic attention token. We are trying to clean up the way the web is funded, which is a mix of mostly advertising and subscriptions, some contributions. We're doing it with anonymity, we're doing it with the basic attention token on the Ethereum blockchain, and we're pragmatists, so we're starting now and evolving with the system toward the Web3 dream. Thanks.
Hi everyone, my name is Matthew Liu. I'm one of the co-founders of Origin Protocol. Previously was at YouTube, Google, a number of other startups before getting into the decentralized space. So at Origin Protocol, we are building a platform that will one day enable many, many different decentralized marketplaces to exist on the blockchain. So a marketplace is a way for buyers and sellers to connect. So our dream is that in the future, you'll have a version of Craigslist, a version of Airbnb, a version of Uber, as well as all their international equivalents, be able to be served off of the blockchain and distributed file systems. And cut out the middlemen. So cutting out the middlemen will reduce the transaction fees that these intermediaries currently take. It will reduce censorship, promote free and open commerce. It will allow the individual ecosystem participants, the buyers and sellers, to have a stake in the network. And also dealing with these digital currencies and these disintermediated marketplaces, we're hopeful that we can open up digital commerce to all the people in the world, 2 billion people that are unbanked, could potentially be using Origin-enabled marketplaces in the future.
Hi, it's loud. Steve Waterhouse, I'm CEO and co-founder of Orchid Labs. Orchid is developing a new mechanism thanks. The problem we're focused on is surveillance and censorship on the internet. Our technology allows developers to build applications that will enable them to move across firewalls, such as the one in China. I guess I'm being censored. It's lightening up. Previous to Orchid, I was a partner at Pantera Capital since 2013, invested in many great projects, including Brendan's. And so I've been focused on this space for a while. As far as Web3 goes, I'm very excited to see the emergence of decentralized applications. I'm curious to see which ones will be unique to the space and not just copies of existing centralized apps.
Okay, so today our topic will be about Web3. And Web3 is a new buzzword that emerges with blockchain hype. And people often say that Web3, define Web3 as decentralized web. So I would like to ask a little bit deeper. So how do you understand the concept of decentralized web? Because internet itself is born to be decentralized. And can you tell the audience a little bit more about your understanding to the Web3 concept? And how do you envision yourself envision your project or company in the Web3 ecosystem?
So Brave is a browser that is much faster than Chrome. On iOS, we use the Apple engine, of course, by blocking trackers and ads. So we're a privacy browser. But we are also building in not just the basic attention token, but very soon we'll ship an Ethereum and ERC20 wallet with MetaMask, which we already bundle as an extension. You can click to turn on. It's not on by default. There are security concerns still with MetaMask. We're trying to find a path toward those truly novel decentralized apps Steve alluded to. And so we view having the ETH wallet as important in addition to the basic attention token support. We might even do other main coin wallets or other blockchain integrations. We have WebTorrent already integrated. IPFS is underway and will follow on the heels of the private tabs with Tor feature that we shipped recently, building on the proxy work we did to integrate the Tor network into private tabs in Brave. And after IPFS, we may get some help from the DAT folks as well. So we're placing a number of bets. We're not picking a winner. We're just integrating these different ideas for how to do decentralized and peer-to-peer apps and websites and things like that. And we're excited about developers coming and using Brave as the platform to build on. In preference to Chrome, we already have over 3.1 million monthly active users and growing, so we're already taking market share from Chrome because Google can't do anything about tracking it. It's an ad business.
Cool. So, you know, Web3 and decentralized applications are kind of like these bundled terms that mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So the way that I think about it is like, yes, the internet was designed to be totally decentralized, but over time there have been kind of like these waves of centralization and then more decentralization and then more centralization. And we're a bit at the peak of a new centralization wave and hopefully on the verge of a decentralization rebound, right? So we have the big companies, Google, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, et cetera. They control so much user data and so much ecosystem power, right? Not only over users, but the other platform participants, third-party developers are kind of at the whims of the app stores, right? And so this concentration of power in the early part of life cycle sometimes is good because it allows everyone to focus on new technology trends. It allows value aggregation to products that people use. But usually at the end of the life cycle, it's quite bad because the platform owners end up being monopolies. They dominate. They take all the value and they control all the rules. So I think this Web3 phenomenon to me is partly about the technology that will allow for decentralized applications and allow for both the work that's done for applications as well as the value capture for doing that work to be much more decentralized, right? So we're talking about decentralized file storage, decentralized hosting. We're talking about users being able to control their own data and decide when that data should be opened up or closed to various applications and platforms. And when it's opened up and shared, then they should be compensated for it in some way, potentially through like the Brave browser, for example, right? And so I think it's much more than just decentralized technology. It's also this movement of the decentralized community, bringing the power back to the people. It's also this concept of crypto economic incentives, right? This is the first time in the world that you can actually have a system that runs by itself, that rewards the right players within the system with these economic incentives. So I think all of that packaged together makes Web3 a very, very complicated but also very fascinating paradigm shift that we're going to undergo for the next 5-10 years. And I'm really excited to see what happens.
Thanks. There's a couple of different questions there. I think just looking at applications initially, it's pretty common for, in every wave of new technology, you see the old applications that have worked in the previous generation of technology being ported to the new generation, and then everyone's like, okay, we're going to get really awesome stores on the internet, and that was like, early .com days, or we're going to do this sort of, there's a place you can put your stuff. And some of those work, and then you start seeing something brand new like eBay, which you couldn't do previously, and that was like sort of like internet native. Similar thing with something like Instagram. It's like essentially mobile native. It only kind of really works in an environment. Or Uber is like geolocation native. This thing just doesn't work without GPS capabilities. So in the blockchain space, we're seeing a lot of people in early days. We saw things like BitPay, like, okay, let's do PayPal on blockchain. Okay, well, great. Okay, that's awesome. But it's interesting, but it's not blockchain native. So what I'm excited to see is the emergence of blockchain native applications. And then I think you got to look at what is unique about the things that we're doing. It's not just decentralization. I was doing peer-to-peer apps in the early Napster Nutella days, and then subsequently a lot of that peer-to-peer technology went into the data centers, and we built distributed storage systems in backends, and a lot of the distributed systems technology is actually in the backends of Dropbox, Google, Facebook, Amazon. That's where this stuff works. You can pull servers apart, and everything just keeps working, and you kill streaming videos, and Netflix still works. So what's unique about what happened back in 2008 is the emergence of incentives in the form of currencies, in the form of currency that you can trust in a distributed way. So then coming back to what we're doing, so our initial idea was, let's figure out how to route traffic. Let's figure out how to route traffic through essentially selling bandwidth from people's computers. So we have a series of nodes within the network, and we incentivize people to provide capabilities from those nodes to allow people to route traffic through the network in a way that cannot be detected. So bandwidth also needs files, and it also needs processing. So now we start thinking to ourselves, okay, well, what else can we do with this? So this gives you the idea of, well, maybe we can build a developer platform which provides these kind of incentives. And I think that is where we're seeing the emergence of really interesting new ideas, is can you build applications where there is an incentive structure for people to provide those resources, where they are a data center and there are certain people looking at essentially providing decentralized access to different data centers, or whether they're an individual user. And I think that's where we're going to start to see the really interesting new applications coming. And honestly, I go to a lot of conferences, and I still don't really see the emergence of the really strong idea. We have one particular idea, which is essentially, an alternative enhanced VPN application. But we're definitely excited to see the emergence of new ideas that's built on our platform or others.
Thank you for the insightful answers. And we're going to talk about privacy. So privacy is an important purpose for why we go decentralization. So can I talk a little bit more about the importance of privacy in your vertical industry and how you aim to solve them using decentralized approach?
So when I started Brave, conventional wisdom was privacy didn't matter, people didn't value privacy. I think Eric Schmidt a few years before had said your teenagers will change their surnames when they reach the age of majority to erase their embarrassing high school non-privacy. I think this is false. I think we're seeing it progressively over time, a rising consciousness of the importance of privacy. Snowden helped, obviously. Facebook's in the news a lot, and my sense is Zuck is kind of in the same state of mind Bill Gates was in the antitrust days with Microsoft, where he doesn't see why these pinheaded politicians are hassling him and he wants to fight it. It's not going to go well, in my opinion. There's already the new General Data Protection Regulation in Europe, came into force late May, is not fully understood, is not being complied with, so there's going to be a number of legal actions, there already are, in progress. Privacy matters. It matters to users in economic terms, and I liked what Steve said, because what cryptocurrencies have allowed us to do is sort of undo the deadweight losses that monopolies and cartels force on people, to price people back into the system when they've been priced out or not paid. Like users who resort to ad blocking are obviously protecting themselves from malware and ransomware and bad ads and tracking. But to some fractional percentage, they're hurting publishers. We see a better way to price users in and pay publishers better by cutting out intermediaries. So privacy matters to users in real costs. There was an estimate from a New York Times study that the cost of the tracking scripts, JavaScript, my fault, as well as the ads, added up to $23 a month. $23 a month on an untiered data plan. This is a couple years ago. Now, the operators have gone to unlimited, but what that's doing is, of course, it's kind of cross-subsidizing different people with each other's unlimited data plan. And the prices haven't gone down that much, really, and there are hidden limits of various kinds. So you should be blocking just to save the network bandwidth that's wasted on tracking scripts and ads. That's a material cost to a lot of people. It also means you're running the radio, which is the #2 battery consumer. So it's draining your battery to not use an ad blocking browser like Brave on mobile.
I'm going to take a slightly more nuanced answer. So my perspective is that privacy is absolutely important and undervalued. And I think we're seeing a bit of this come forth with some of the recent Facebook news, et cetera. In other contexts, privacy may not be that important for certain use cases. I actually think the real key here is user agency as well as education. So do users understand how their data is being used? Do they actually formally consent to it in an intelligent way? Or are they just kind of being pushed through by these big conglomerates, and then they're at the mercy of Facebook ads or Google ads, et cetera. And so user optionality is something that I think we want to be able to give back to internet users. In many cases, that means you do want to hide data, right? You do want things to basically be controlled, and you want to be incentivized to share that data. In other situations, it may be that that data, you're totally okay with it being out in the public and open and used, right? Blockchain, by nature, a lot of the data is actually out in the open. You can see all the transaction histories. In our world, where we're talking about building a platform that will enable many different types of commerce across different marketplaces. In some cases, it would be great to be able to have your user data, your reputation, your transaction history, your user identity actually be portable across many different decentralized applications versus being siloed and controlled by an Uber, an Airbnb, a Lyft, a Postmates, DoorDash, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Everyone here has 15, 20 individual accounts that are not owned by them, but that are owned by each one of these companies. And so I think it is very contextual. I do think that overall, privacy has not been brought to the center stage in the past as it should have been, and now it is much more center stage, and I think we need to embrace that. But I also think that it's about having the user levers so that they can control how much their data is shared, to whom it's shared, and whether or not they're compensated, and how much they're compensated for sharing that data.
Thanks. I think I'll just maybe pause this a little bit differently. I'm definitely a believer in the value of your data in terms of its ability to personalize your experience or be part of an application's experience. That's suddenly a major part of how applications are built today, and I definitely wouldn't want to, see that disappear. So there's a certain amount of aspect of control of your data and privacy there, which is important. And then there's another angle, an area we've been focused on a lot, which is we don't really think about in this country that much. But if you want to get on a plane and go to Beijing and experience what it's like to access the internet there, or their version of the internet there, you'll experience a very different aspect of what it means to be private, to be surveilled, or to be anonymous. And normally when we say the word anonymous, everyone freaks out. They're like, oh my goodness, we're going to cause some kind of Armageddon and chaos and the world's going to end. But there's another alternative there, which is kind of what we started to see with the emergence of surveillance capitalism as practiced by Facebook and other companies, and surveillance states, which are emerging all the time around the world and increasing in strength and becoming what we believe is a major issue. Now, I think there's definitely a balance there. I think you can still have applications which use user data and, as we were talking about, give users some control of that, but also give people the option to perhaps not be mass surveilled in a dragnet-style capability. And I also don't believe that the removal of that kind of surveillance is necessarily going to cause chaos. If a government agency wants to own my phone and surveil me, I'm pretty sure they can figure out how to do it without having to collect every single person in this room's information at the same time. So I think there's definitely nuanced aspects to this, and I think I definitely do have a social profile. I use it to promote my company and other things. But I'm also conscious of what I'm sharing, and I think differently about how I share pictures of my family, which I don't, or telling people exactly what location I'm in or what my address is. So I think my advice in terms of this world is just be conscious about what you're being private about.
Well, an internet with privacy and decentralization always sounds fantastic. However, sometimes privacy and decentralization comes with a cost. For example, maybe on performance, maybe on usability and tech barrier, or sometimes cut your revenue model. So how do you balance the security and freedom against those detrimental side, with the bad side? And how do you convince your friend to use your product or service instead of the centralized equivalents?
So with the basic attention token, we want to have it in multiple apps. We're starting with Brave. There are other apps we're talking to that might integrate it soon once we sort of package an SDK with high integrity based on open source for all the features. Brave wins with users the same way Netscape took down Mosaic, Firefox took down IE, and Chrome took down IE and Firefox, which is speed. And speed is a correlate of privacy due to ad blocking, due to blocking all those tracking scripts that save you so much data that it could be $23 a month on a tiered plan. Speed always works. There is definitely a sacrifice in speed if you try to decentralize on Ethereum today, and we don't. It's just not practical. I met some people I know at Solana, which is doing a high throughput blockchain. They're just starting. It sounds great. Maybe in a few years, that will be where people migrate to. We're not worrying about that because privacy wants a lot of the analytics to be on your device. We're carrying these supercomputers in our pocket. We can do a lot there before we try to push things out. And one comment on privacy by default, which I do advocate. Right now, the user is at a disadvantage and has no sort of collective bargaining power. So trying to find a balance from a weak position won't work. You will be taken advantage of by the strong players. Absolutely, the governments and the big companies. So I think by default, you should be more secure. You should control what you leak because we always leak information. It's kind of a truism that it's impossible to have perfect confidentiality and leak 0 bits as you operate on a network. But you can do a lot better by choosing privacy by default solutions.
I'll talk about decentralization more than the privacy angle. But first, yes, I agree that decentralization right now, there are many challenges to it, right? There are scalability challenges, there are sometimes security challenges. And so decentralization itself is more a implementation method than an actual value creation for a user, right? And so from our perspective, decentralization is only worth the tax, the engineering tax, the organization tax, the educational tax for consumers, unless the decentralized solution creates real value that's different from the existing centralized counterparts. And so that varies on a DApp by DApp, platform by platform basis. If you don't actually solve real user problems, then there's no point to decentralization. If the centralized solutions are working perfectly fine, then use the centralized one. It's faster to code in Python or Node than it is to figure out how to build something on Ethereum IPFS. All right, so are there situations where decentralization actually matters and solves real problems? 100,000%. Just using ours as an example, what can decentralized marketplaces do better than centralized marketplaces? We think of at least 2 large buckets of value creation. One is financial incentives for buyers and sellers. The second is access to goods and services for buyers and sellers. So the first, financial incentives, first thing I talked about at the beginning of this talk is how do we cut down fees? Let's bring down the 15–20% transaction fees that these centralized intermediaries are charging today. You take that away, that's instant financial reason for a user to potentially use your slower or less scalable solution if they can save a couple $100 when they're making their next Airbnb-style booking. Also, on the financial incentive side, we're talking about these new crypto economic incentive systems where we can have partners, we can have entrepreneurs, we can have buyers and sellers that are interacting on this platform, all get a stake of this platform as early participants. And if the platform grows over time, just like in Bitcoin mining, Ethereum mining, they may actually stand to make a profit out of being these early adopters. That's a reason to potentially switch to these decentralized systems. On the access side, there are places all over the world where you can't get services that we take for granted in the Western world, the United States. Just Uber, the probably most high profile, it's banned in South Korea, it's banned in a number of countries. Airbnb is heavily censored and regulated in many markets. But there's also many other niche cases, especially, let's say, in the Middle East, for example, where a lot of things are just not available. And so if you can solve that access problem and you can get these goods and services to people's hands through a decentralized marketplace, you solve the real problem. The centralized equivalent cannot exist in those marketplaces. And finally, also on the access side, I alluded to this earlier, there are 2 billion people that are unbanked in the world right now. They don't have bank accounts, credit cards, they can't get lending. A lot of them are still dealing with fiat currencies that are highly unstable and very volatile. A lot of them are still dealing with barter, can you believe that, right? And so these 2 billion unbanked people, they do have cheap Android phones now, so Google's doing something potentially helpful. And that means that if they start learning about digital currencies and can transact on these new decentralized marketplaces, this could be the first time that they get a chance to actually do business on this new decentralized internet.
I think I want to take this in a slightly different question. There's a pretty good analogy. I think it was, might have been Naval or Nick Zaba was talking about this idea of efficiency. And so when you look at Bitcoin, it's not a very efficient design. It's much more efficient to take a Oracle database and a server and put the database of transactions for Bitcoin on that. Now, the challenge with that is that it's not resistant to attack. So I can go and unplug that machine, or I can take over the company that does it, or I can put the person in jail. I can do all these different things, or I can look at the back end of it and manipulate it and change that information. So what Bitcoin allows you to do with its design, which is not efficient, is to resist the ability for people to come in and act either by attacking that network or by manipulating that network in order to change the system. And so when you start thinking about efficiency and the trade-offs for decentralization or privacy or security, I think it's important to look at the actual objective function as to what you're trying to solve. So one of the things we've been looking at, and many other projects are focused on, is the idea of being resistant to different kinds of attacks. And that's a design objective that is quite different to being highly efficient. And for example, if you want to do the best video streaming you could do in the world, you'd put the server in this room and you'd connect to it through a cable. You wouldn't do it over a network. That would be really, really fast video streaming. But it wouldn't be very useful because you couldn't leave the room, right? But if you want to play, want to play video games in this room with all of us, it's really, really fast to do it on the same machine, on the same network. So I think I would think about those kind of criteria. But I think the other assumption that a lot of people make is that just because it's private or secure or resistant, it's therefore inefficient or it's therefore slow. And I think, as Brendan was pointing out, there are a number of new designs that are coming up as people take the history of distributed systems and start bringing it up to date, because a lot of that stuff really got forgotten when Bitcoin came out. They were like, hey, there's this one idea, proof of work, let's just go down that rabbit hole. And now we're starting to see other graph-based structures, and it's one of the reasons that we started on Ethereum, and now we're actually building our own blockchain, which has a different kind of design. Also because we recognize that Ethereum is not resistant to certain kinds of attacks. And so once you start with different design principles, it starts helping you to understand, whether some of these trades of efficiency or security and so on are really there or not.
That's really a promising future. Yeah, thank you. And again, let's thank you our panelists for the insights for sharing. And and that's all for the panel.
Thank you, everyone.